Bunny or Bozo the Clown.
Late night making things that
You can make lots of pretty pictures with Light Bright from Hasbro.
Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. Episode 86, The Ambergris Element, and The Slaver Weapon. From Star Trek, the animated series.
Welcome to Mission Log, a Roddenberry Star Trek podcast. I'm John Champion.
And I'm Ken Ray. Today on the show, where we pick apart and analyze every episode of Star Trek, the Ambergris Element and the Slaver Weapon.
Ken, not too much in the way of poetic titles this week, I'm afraid. Ambergris, which we'll get to in a moment, plays a role in our first episode, and the Slaver Weapon is about a weapon built by the slavers, literally.
Yeah.
So we got that. No Shakespeare to that. So
I love that. Do you think somebody was tired? Or both of those writers were tired this week? Just like, what are you going to call it? Oh, we could call it, nah, screw it. Let's call it what it is. I'm bored.
Right.
I've got lunch. Yeah, So let's go.
Yeah. So those are the two episodes for this week, the Ambergris Element and the Slaver Weapon. And boy, howdy, are you in for a fun show today. But Ken, before we get into the excitement of these two animated episodes, I'm ready, I'm willing, and I'm waiting to get to the trivia.
Well, wait no more, my friend. Go ahead and get right to that trivia thing that you do.
All right, Ken, I got two very important elements to talk about today.
Yeah.
The first of which is that today's second show is most notable and very important for the conspicuous absence of Captain James T. Kirk. This is the only episode of filmed Star Trek from the original cast that omits William Shatner as Kirk. If we're not counting The Cage, because, of course, The Cage didn't air until much later, blah, blah, blah. But right. The original cast, that we know and love, this is the only time that they made an episode without him.
Really?
Yeah.
Now, I will say, though, I know that Majel Barrett at the time doubled up. and I'm guessing there's more James Doohan than humans should actually be exposed to in one 24-minute period.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot from a lot of the original people that you know. It is interesting, though. It never occurred to me that... What was the one where Kirk was a ghost? It was originally going to be a ghost story, but he was actually trapped in another plane.
Yeah, the Tholian Web.
Yeah, that was practically without Kirk.
Yeah.
But
there was very little Kirk.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there are other stories. There are books. There are audiobooks. There are video games. There are all kinds of things that do not have Kirk or have much less Kirk. When we're talking about the filmed, and dare I use the word canon, episodes of Star Trek using the original cast, this is the one that kind of stands out for him not being there. And then we have to talk about the most commonly known bit of trivia, but I have to mention it because a lot of our listeners have commented on this and wanted to know, when are you going to mention this? When are you going to mention this? Well, today is the day I mention it. The director for Star Trek, the animated series, Hal Sutherland, who is one of the three partners who formed Filmation, was colorblind. And we've seen hints of this before. We had pink tribbles in More Tribbles, More Troubles. We've seen pink Klingon outfits, a little out of step with how we originally knew the Klingons. But I felt like I wanted to save it for this episode because this really is the most egregious use of pink. The Kzinti aliens in the Slaver Weapon. Because they are these fearsome cat creatures, maybe a distant cousin to Mress.
No, wait, these are totally the fish cats from the Time Trap.
Oh, the fish cat. There you go.
Yeah. These are they.
These are they. You're right. You're absolutely right. Oh, see, I just made that connection myself. Again, not to say that they're not a distant cousin of Mress, but they're the fearsome fish cats, and they have bright pink and purple outfits. They have a pink spaceship. It's just pink everywhere in this episode. Now, to me, this whole thing raises way more questions than it answers. Like, it's very interesting for Star Trek fans to go, oh, hey, the director was colorblind, and that's why you have all these crazy colors. I could forgive it in More Tribbles, More Troubles, because I go, okay, well, these are the new different Tribbles. We need to make them look different from the other Tribbles. So for this one, they're pink. It's a Saturday morning cartoon show. Who will know? But here's the thing, Ken. When you get to the Kzinti and their bright pink outfits and their bright pink spaceship, I keep thinking I have to take into account the number of animators who worked on Star Trek, which was at least 75, we know. Okay. The number of other shows that had been created at this point by Filmation, which was a lot. So Filmation has a whole history there of working with. Remember, I said that they had something like 2,000 animators at their peak. The number of executives, you not only had the Filmation crew, but you had the Star Trek crew. You had Gene Roddenberry, DC Fontana, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. The fact that other Star Trek stories had already been made and aired by this point. So somebody somewhere is watching these episodes. Somebody in an office in north of the valley was okaying everything that came from the animators. So it just made me think that there were about 75 animators who said, hey, we're going to make these pink and we're going to see if Hal notices. And if he doesn't, the joke's on him. But yeah.
Well, it's just alien. Honestly, it did not even occur to me. I mean, it is a little weird. I mean, honestly, the weird thing to me was the way they walked. The Kzinti walk like when you hold up a cat and pretend it's walking. I mean, they walk like that. Right. That part to me was weird. The fact that they would be pink, though, I mean, it's only going to be a couple of years after this that we're going to have a whole cartoon dedicated to Grape Ape.
Well, that's true. That's true. But we've also had pink Klingons. We've had a lot of pink spaceships. And, when you start an animated venture like this, you usually do a character sheet and all the common elements that we use throughout the shows. You do a SketchUp, and then you have paint, basically like a paint chip or paint notes that say, okay, this is this color, this is this color. So you always stay consistent through every one. So if you pick up a Klingon ship or a Klingon outfit and you go, okay, well, this Klingon outfit needs to be bright pink. Somewhere down the road should say, well, on our character sheets, if we can compare it to the original, maybe they should be gray.
Yeah, but gray is boring.
I know it is.
Seriously, gray is boring. I mean, think about the primary colors that were used to such great effect and the great lights that were used to such great effect as color TVs were becoming prevalent in the mid to late 60s on Star Trek, right? Suddenly you're going to go gray? No. That's for the next generation or maybe the generation after that or whatever you call whatever generation follows, the original cast.
Cartoon number 1, The Ambergris Element.
Act 1. Arriving at the planet Argo, Captain Kirk, along with Spock, McCoy, and Lieutenant Clayton, he's some dude in red, are exploring in the Aqua Shuttle. Argo was once full of land, but through seismic shifts, the surface is now almost entirely water. Before you know it, a big, angry red monster emerges from the ocean and starts batting around the Aqua Shuttle like a toy. Phasers are fired and the creature is stunned. While it's out, the crew go in for a closer look, but of course it wakes up and the chase is on again. McCoy and Clayton are beamed back to the Enterprise in safety, but Kirk and Spock are missing. When a search party finally tracks them down 5 days later, they look okay, but McCoy makes a shocking discovery. They now have webbed fingers and gills. Act 2. McCoy has Kirk and Spock in a water tank on the Enterprise. They are healthy, but everything has changed. They breathe water just like a fish would. And the episode ends there. For all remaining Star Trek, Kirk and Spock will be in an aquarium. Okay, well, not really. Their physiology has been mutated, and McCoy assumes it was done on purpose, definitely by an intelligent life form. McCoy has no idea what to do, but Kirk and Spock are ready to go back to the planet to explore. There must be a way to find out what happened, and the answer lies somewhere hidden below the surface of Argo. Swimming the depths, Kirk and Spock encounter a race of, well, they're fish people, kind of like a kinder, gentler version of the creature from the Black Lagoon, except they're not so kind. They just want to be left alone. So naturally, Kirk and Spock try to find their home when they happen upon a magnificent city on the ocean floor. They are soon captured and pulled into a kind of tribunal where they are accused of being spies. Worse than that, they are air breathers and not to be trusted by the Aquans. Domar, their leader, paints them as enemies, and their ancient texts warned of a day when the air breathers would come. A few of the younger people on the tribunal actually seem to have different feelings. After all, Kirk and Spock were unarmed, and what's the point of following what the ancient texts say all the time anyway? Well, what's the use in debating? The rest of the landing party have been spotted, and Domar decides that the best way to handle the intruders is to have them netted on dry land where they will suffocate. Taking pity on them, and probably out of curiosity, one of the Aquan females, Rila, leads the landing crew to help find their friends. Everyone is freed, and now Scotty is in the drink, using one of those awesome force field belts, to relay a message he got from the Enterprise. Another seismic event is on the way, and it could seriously do some damage to this planet, again. Rila takes her new friends to the reef barrier, where they will penetrate their ancient ruins and find the texts about mutation. Generations ago, her people were air breathers, but some were mutated when the planet started changing. After that, the mutations were passed on from generation to generation. Maybe this will be a help to them if they are to become air breathers again. In short order, they find the ruins and find a room filled with medical paraphernalia. Spock assumes this was all on the surface before the... Oh, great. Here's that big, angry red monster again. Act 3. Just when our heroes are about to become fish food, a well-timed tremor breaks free some of the ancient buildings and traps the nasty man-eating creature. In McCoy's medical lab, he's having a look at those old medical records. He figures out that the element that made them mutate in the first place is kind of like the ambergris found in Earth whales. The antidote is going to be found in the venom of, oh no, yeah, you guessed it, the Sur Snake, our old friend Big Red with the insatiable appetite. Kirk and Spock ask the Aquans, well, the cool ones anyway, for help. They see it like this. They need the help anyway to get back to breathing air. For the Aquans, just look at all the scientific knowledge you'll be rediscovering from your ancestors. Time to break some rules from the ancient text and go rustle up a monster. They do, and the venom is captured. McCoy isn't too sure how much of the toxin to use, but when has that ever stopped him from injecting his friends? Kirk goes through a few dramatic changes. He's pale, he's flush, he's scaly, he's smooth. He passes out, but it looks like it's working. We're back to old air-breathing Captain Kirk again. As a thank you to the Aquans, Kirk orders the Enterprise to fire phasers onto Argo, which will shift the epicenter of the upcoming quake, thus saving the Aquan city. Domar and Rila are guests on board the Enterprise for this, both wearing protective gear so they can breathe water, and Domar is a little taken aback with the cool technology of the starship. But I mean, who wouldn't be? He might just like this whole applied knowledge and science thing after all. One upshot of shifting the earthquake, that lost city is shifted back up above water. Domar is so overwhelmed that he offers the knowledge of Argo open to the Federation. He also says that the young Aquans have decided to undergo the mutation back to air breathing in order to rebuild their ancient civilization. The old ones will stay underwater. Kirk says, yeah, that's cool, just don't forget about each other. Domar says, no, they won't. They'll make laws for that.
Yeah.
I know.
We'll get to it. We'll get to that part. Yeah, interesting that you say sort of like kinder, gentler creatures from the Black Lagoon. Mm-hmm. Planet of the Sea Monkeys. That's what I was thinking the whole time. Planet of the Sea Monkeys.
They do. That would be a great advertising tie-in. I hope that when this aired in 1973, they had a TV ad for sea monkeys.
That would be cool. Yeah, maybe we'll find out later.
Or if you were a kid and you picked up your Gold Key comics for Star Trek that came out around the time.
Or your copy of Richie Rich.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
I remember those. Please. I had Sea Monkeys in like 1974, 75, and I was so excited because I was looking forward to the little cities they were going to build.
Yeah, they didn't
Nuts
do that,
to that crud. Yeah, I know. No,
it's tiny, tiny little black specks that then died.
Krill.
Yeah.
Wasn't it krill? Is that what it is?
Yeah, they were brine shrimp.
Yeah, brine shrimp. Yeah. Good times. Yeah.
So, Ken, this episode was written by Margaret Arman, who we mentioned before in The Lorelei Signal, because she wrote that, and of course her many contributions to the original series. Ken, you nailed it. We have James Doohan here, in fact, doing 7 voices in this episode.
Payday. Big payday for James Doohan that week.
Majel did the voice of Rila.
Yeah, and other voices. That's the thing. I mean, it got a little confusing after a while because she was doing even less changes than Nichelle Nichols did last week.
Right.
So, I mean, it was like just tiny little modulations, and then the drawings weren't that different. And you got the impression that, I mean, she was basically every female Aquan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You may have asked yourself at the beginning of this episode, what is ambergris?
I didn't.
You didn't? Well,
I know it has to do with whaling. That's all I remember.
It does. Not to put too fine a point on it, but it is, in fact, whale poop.
Oh.
Well, to be a little more specific, whales will secrete this waxy, hard substance from their intestinal tract. Mm-hmm. And if they eat something that cannot be digested easily, the ambergris sort of surrounds that, and then they either cough it up or expel it from the other end. Okay. So you will find these chunks of ambergris containing, various formerly sea life that a whale could not digest. And the ambergris was used, but its waxy stuff was used as like a stabilizer in cosmetics very often. So, so it's still a thing. It's still around. It's rare. But that is what ambergris really is. And the other thing that kind of caught my eye in this episode is the use of the caduceus. Mm-hmm. Here we are on a planet far, far away, underwater, ancient civilization, and Spock knows that they're in the sort of the medical records of this ancient city because they have like an Aquan version or an Argo version of the caduceus. Mm-hmm. The caduceus was a Greek symbol used by Hermes. Is a winged staff with two intertwined serpents. And as I found in my research, it has nothing to do with medicine. It never was a medical symbol until the United States of America, late 19th century. Is when that got adopted. Yeah, it was never intended for that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had no idea because my dad is a doctor, and I remember seeing the caduceus on everything, on medical journals, and there's all kinds of stuff. There it is, and I always made the association. That is erroneous, although it has been used ever since.
Well, maybe I guess our two societies, it's sort of like the Mary thing, with like a whole other Earth, right?
Right.
Maybe our two societies, maybe they had like a U.S. in the 1900s on this planet.
Right.
Before the cataclysm.
Yeah,
can I ask a question again about the cataclysm? Forgive me.
Yeah,
and I know, it's called Star Trek, right? Mm-hmm, and almost every episode takes place, with a spaceship. Right. Even if we don't always see the spaceship, they got there by spaceship. We know all this, right? Mm-hmm. Once again, there's a planet facing disaster, and so the Enterprise is trying to figure out how to save the planet without getting the people off the planet.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure why exactly, because apparently there is something as big and bad as what happened on this planet coming to another planet on the Federation. And somehow going to visit the sea planet, they learn about tectonic plates, and that tells them how to save the people of the other planet. In the meantime, we're not getting them off the planet for anything, apparently.
Right.
Okay.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, for all the people saving they have to do in the future.
Yeah. But don't take them anywhere. They don't like to go places. Right.
Well, I mean, that might be very difficult. And for a guy like Scotty, and now you've got all these water-breathing creatures, what's Scotty going to do? Is he going to build a tank in the Enterprise and beam them up with water and then fly around? That'll never happen.
Well, I didn't mean those people. No, the people, the
original Ark.
Are going to be fine. No, I'm talking about the planet that they're trying to save. They're like, oh no, there's another planet that's going to have the same kind of thing that you guys have here.
Just beam them out of there.
So they're still air breathers at that point.
Right.
This is not that difficult. Although apparently it's not that difficult to bring a water breather up. Just put a tub of water on their head. I mean, it's kind of interesting actually. Spock. There was a weird moment where I was like, Spock seems to be having the same problem that Kirk has with what defines Spock, right? Because Spock's like, I'm in an aquarium. I'd be useless to the Enterprise. Well, and then later we find out, well, we have these water suits that you could wear around. But no, apparently not. That wouldn't be a thing. But also, Spock is a science officer. So really all you need to do is like treat some of his machinery with, something that would keep it from being ruined by being submerged in water.
So it's just not leaking all over it. Yeah.
Right. And he's still able to do that. I was a tiny bit, it just reminded me a little bit of what is Spock?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Discussions that we've had before. Is Spock in a computer still Spock? Kirk would say no. And then is Spock in a 50-foot tall Spock still Spock? Kirk would say no.
Definitely says no.
And this time, what is Spock in water? Well, Spock says he's not Spock at that point. Or at least there's no use for Spock in water. You need dry land Spock. You put them together anyway.
Right. No, that's a really good point. And by the way, speaking of the water planet, and we get that new Aqua shuttle, and I just want to say now, Ken, that I feel really cheated that that Aqua shuttle, the little boat they had, it's a shame that Star Trek, the animated series, did not run longer and gain more popularity than it did, because under different circumstances, this would have been like G.I. Joe, and we would have gotten the Aqua Shuttle playset. We would have gotten the motorboat playset. We would have gotten the Hangar Bay action playset where you could put all of those things. And I'm kind of bummed now that stuff did not happen.
Yeah, because you don't have enough Star Trek toys.
I don't, not nearly enough. I would need far, far more.
They need to make more, dang it.
Yeah. Hey, did you notice that quick little line, kind of throwaway? McCoy says that he's surprised to see that Spock and Kirk have secondary transparent eyelids. But we know from Operation Annihilate that Spock already had that.
Yeah, I was wondering, did the Aquans actually take off his other secondary
put on new ones,
or did they just be like, oh well, he's already got these? Oh, okay, well we'll save those then. We might need those later, so keep those, because there's no point in this guy having 3 sets of eyelids. That would just be stupid.
Yeah. Also, our crew are fully clothed while swimming around. They even keep the boots on. Seems like it would all get very heavy.
Yeah.
But at least we learned before that their uniforms are made out of algae, so they should be right at home.
Is it going to start growing?
It might.
Because they're
just
watering
bigger
it
and
now.
bigger uniforms.
Exactly.
And also, it was kind of tricky predicting seismic activity.
Not in the future.
Well, apparently not. They were like, 4 hours. You're going to have a giant earthquake.
Oh, now it's going to be 2 hours. Now it's just under 2 hours. Okay, stand back, everybody. You got 30 seconds. 30 seconds to earthquake. Please stand by.
Yeah, that would be a nice technology to have, but we don't have that now. I don't know if we ever will, but I'll hang in there for it, Ken.
Oh, my God. You are so weird to me sometimes.
Why?
Well, we're talking about a show with spaceships and teleporters and neat little sort of force field belts. And all that you'll take, but you're like, I don't know if we're going to be able to predict earthquakes.
Well,
I mean, we've got all the stuff for earthquakes right now. I mean, we've got all that stuff. It's just a matter of figuring it out, right?
Well, we've got earthquakes.
Right.
But we don't have a way of predicting the future. That's kind of the problem.
Well, not predicting the future, but I mean, this is not like, angels aren't coming down and shaking the earth. I mean, this is happening with physical stuff that we have here. It seems to me that we run, at least the same chance of one day, and I understand I'm saying one day, I'm not saying tomorrow, one day figuring out when earthquakes are going to happen as we do teleportation.
Yeah. Well, it would be a helpful technology to have.
It would be a helpful technology to have. On that, we agree.
Well, let's talk about the big thing here. To me, I thought about two things. I did think about the opening of Star Trek Into Darkness, just because, hey, we're going to go to a water planet, and instead of just sending our guys down with an Aqua shuttle, we'll park the whole Enterprise underwater. But that's neither here nor there, because we don't break the timeline like that.
I'm sorry, Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yeah, we'll get to it much later.
What?
Yeah,
okay.
Don't worry about it.
All right.
But here's the thing that I really thought about. I thought about Planet of the Apes so much while watching this episode.
Yeah.
Planet, and primarily the original movie, just because that movie, screenplay by Rod Serling, by the way, was able to say so much in that science fiction story. It was able to tackle everything. They were able to talk about religion and politics and slavery and the environment and all these things together. And I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And I thought, well, here's Margaret Arman basically doing a take on that. Planet of the Apes, of course, was wildly popular. It came out in 1969, I believe, 68 or 69.
I want to say it was 68, but okay.
Okay, but then you also had, you're right, 68, yeah. But then you also had the cartoon series. You also had the sequel. So by this time, early 70s, Planet of the Apes was very much part of the popular culture. I love the idea that the Aquans were air breathers who now became something else, and they forgot who they were. So just like the apes had evolved and used to be a different species of ape and used to coexist with man, and that sort of changed their whole perspective. They used their technology, but then they feared its power and what it revealed about them. So also a parallel to Planet of the Apes. The other air breathers turned to savagery when their planet was changing. Their ancient texts are hidden away. They have ancient ruins. All of this stuff really made me think that Margaret Arment had been watching Planet of the Apes.
What's interesting is, and I guess these would have been written around the same time as the other, it actually reminded me a lot of Battle for the Planet of the Apes as well. I'm huge into the Planet of the Apes movies, but the Battle for the Planet of the Apes was the one where you had the kids.
Yeah.
Where you had the youngsters sort of sitting down and fighting the, military-industrial ape complex,
right,
and saying, hey, we don't have to think this way, we don't have to be this way, which certainly you get off the young Aquans later.
Yeah. So I thought that was just really, really cool.
I was actually a little bit bothered by the there's a tiny bit of ageism in this, actually. And maybe it's because I'm in my mid-40s. At this point, as we record this, I'm in my early to mid 40s, and I'm kind of getting bothered by the whole, age thing. I was offended a tiny bit, honestly, that the young Aquans were going to rebuild the cities of the surface dwellers, but the old people can't cope, and they even freely admit that they cannot cope.
Right.
Now, I don't know how old Miss Arment was when she was writing this, but I mean, Roddenberry at this point was in his mid 40s. Gene Roddenberry, was in his mid 40s at this point when the cartoons were written. Not an old guy. I mean, not a young guy, but not an old guy at this point, right? And the idea that the future belongs exclusively to the young, it just kind of annoyed me. But again, that's exactly where I am right now. This whole, I'm like 6 inches from get off my lawn. And I'm trying really hard to be like the guy who's like, hey, maybe those kids have a good idea on my lawn. So I was a little bothered by the age aspect of that.
Well, it's funny. Domar says that the Aquans couldn't bear the thought of changing.
Yep. The old Aquans. The old Aquans.
The old ones, yeah. But I'll give him credit. I think he did a pretty good job of it so far. He was able to finally accept the idea. Once he's beamed up to the Enterprise, that's sort of the magic cure-all for everybody. Beam them up to the Enterprise and go, look, we can do all this other stuff because we apply our scientific knowledge and, we don't have to live stuck the way that you live. We decided to do something different. So I thought that was interesting. I also thought this could be bad news for the Aquans who live underwater, because if they're leaving only the old ones behind, I don't know much about Aquan reproduction, but this could be bad, that the whole underwater version of the Aquans will just die out, and you only have the young ones up on land being able to reproduce and create new Aquans who will no longer be Aquans. They will be air-breathing, land-dwelling Argons.
Well,
Argonauts.
They did not say, though, that all of the young Aquans were going. They just said none of the old ones were.
It would only be young Aquans.
I mean, not every kid leaves the farm. Yeah. I mean, to put it in its most basic terms, I mean, some people never leave their hometown, and that's true of urban areas, and that's true of far off country villages. I mean, some people don't go off to see the big city, or some people don't go off to explore. And so my assumption is not that it's only the old Aquans that are left. It's just none of the old Aquans are going above.
Interesting. Yeah. I agree with you that I thought it was interesting that he and at least many or all of the old Aquans would get to a place that they wouldn't be able to change. Mm-hmm. And it's just assumed, here's Domar speaking for all of the old Aquans, that none of them would be able to accept a change. And I just kept thinking, well, apply that to your favorite political topic for fun,
Nice.
Because I always had this thought in my mind as well. And we talked about this a very little bit when we talked about Let This Be Your Last Battlefield. You and I grew up in the South. And fortunately, we grew up in a time that was right after the major civil rights upheaval. But then I thought, okay, here are all these people. I grew up in Alabama. George Wallace was governor during that nonsense, and he was governor again in the 80s. And I kept thinking, well, here's somebody who, do I accept that they have fundamentally changed their outlook and their beliefs? Or is this political expediency to get the job back? You know? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know. You never truly know what is in somebody's mind as they are, running for office or doing something like that. But I kept thinking, well, is he at a certain age able to actually change his point of view and his beliefs in order to lead and govern effectively and equally and fairly? That's kind of the most important thing there.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to speak to Mr. Wallace in particular, but, I would hope that people can always change. I mean, do they? Not necessarily. And certainly, I would guess as you get older, there may be more reason to not, or there may be more reason to not want to. Mm-hmm. But I know plenty of people who have. I mean, I know people whose parents were, I would say, homophobic. Mm-hmm. Or maybe, I'd go with homophobic, until it turned out that their kid was a homosexual.
Right.
And then all of a sudden it turns out that is not the worst thing in the world. And I mean, that's a very personal thing. I mean, where suddenly you're sort of forced to confront something about yourself, and either you're going to change or you're going to lose contact with your child, no matter how old they are. I mean, they're certainly not child age at that point. But
right.
I mean, I think we do have the capacity to change. The question is, what's going to make that happen? And who knows? Yeah. Maybe all the young Aquans going up would force some of the older Aquans to think, the Surface might not be the worst thing in the world.
I would hope so.
Yeah,
because I think the young Aquans could benefit from the presence of the old Aquans in some way.
Right.
So, yeah. Should we go ahead to the lessons of the episode?
Oh, well, we said we were going to get to the ordainments. I gotta say really quickly.
Yeah.
I'm bothered by the joke about writing new ordainments at the end.
Yeah.
So the ordainments have kept people from, learning and exploring and doing anything new, from knowing more. Mm-hmm. Than they know, than what's been passed down by the written law. And if you think that doesn't have real world implications, I would love to tell you a story, if I could, John.
Go right ahead.
And people who listen to another podcast that I've done may have heard this story. But when I was 11 or 12 years old, I wrote a very basic computer program. Like in the basic computer language, I wrote this very basic program. And it had to do with money. And my thinking was, if I had money in a bank account, I didn't need to have physical money. All I needed was proof that I had the money, that I had that value someplace, right? So I should then be able to buy things without cash, simply by moving the value that I had acquired from one account to somebody else's account. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not that weird an idea. It's called a debit card. But I was 12, and I didn't have a debit card, and I had no knowledge of such things, and it just seemed like an idea that, made sense. So I started working on this program for it. I finished this program for it. I showed it to the most technically advanced person I knew, who was my dad, who immediately started telling me to do nothing that would bring about the cashless society. Because apparently this was based on his reading of Revelations. Literally, this was his reading of Revelations. Now, would I have been some amazing computer or finance whiz kid had he not done that? Would I have been rich? Would we all be saying my name with Bill Gates and Steve Jobs? No, we would not. But I do know that my movement in that direction was blocked immediately. I had no interest in even looking into that stuff anymore because one person that I respected had this very fundamentalist reading of what you could call the ordainments, if you want to. Mm-hmm. And while I get that the young Aquan was kind of joking about the ordainments, this might be a good time for the Aquans to learn the phrase, "Oh, too soon?" Because the ordainments have, in just the last 10 minutes caused a tremendous amount of trouble. And honestly, it was almost like Kirk calling up and saying, "I have a little surprise for Scotty" at the end of Bread and Circuses. It feels like a lot of the lessons of this episode were undone.
Yeah.
In just the last minute of, "Oh, don't worry, we're gonna make laws that we're gonna pay attention to this time." Well, no, the laws that you were paying attention to last time nearly got, us killed, right. And really didn't serve you that well. Yeah, go ahead and make your little joke. It just kind of it rubbed me seriously the wrong way. Again, maybe because of personal stuff. This episode brought up a lot of personal stuff for me, John.
I'm sorry to hear that, Ken.
No, it's all
sorry.
right.
You're going to be okay. No, I thought the same thing. I kept hoping that they would just start over with a brand new Constitution because they really needed to. Maybe Kirk needed to do the dramatic reading of the U.S. Constitution in this episode. I worried about that too. Very often creating new laws is not the answer, but rather just striking the old laws that don't make any sense is the better idea. When you apply all of this to it's two things going on here. First of all, it's the sort of over bureaucratizing of their society. Instead of just saying it's a good idea that we talk to each other, actually making that into a law, that's a very bad idea. And I kind of hope for I don't know, had this been a filmed episode rather than an animated episode, there might have been another scene after that of Kirk saying, no, you don't need a law for that. Just be nice to each other, talk to each other. That's all you need to do. But the other interesting thing here to me is that, here we are back to this blind faith thing that we've tackled many times in Star Trek about the ancient texts not being a reliable way to address current problems. That was a lesson line from this, spoken by one of the Aquans. Ordainments are useless in times of turbulence. Only knowledge will help us. And he's right. They can respect and honor the ancient scrolls as much as they want to, but it doesn't actually apply to the here and now of solving their problem. To me, this episode kind of fits in with the other subversive messages we've already seen in the animated series. We already got to meet the devil,
right?
And we explained to our audience of 8-year-olds that he isn't a mystical demon to be feared, but rather he's a being to be understood.
Yeah.
And I would even take this episode because it is very kind of heavy-handed and glaringly obvious. So I would put it in the category of Let That Be Your Last Battlefield to say that it is that obvious, but it's still provocative and it's still smart. And in fact, it's so smart that it probably went right over the heads of a lot of 8 to 10-year-olds. But I'm really glad we get to talk about it as adults.
It may have gone right over the head of a lot of 8 to 10-year-olds, but at the same time, it has to have lodged in there. You know what I mean? I mean, there's lots of stuff, like all the sharing stuff that you get on Sesame Street. We're not getting a gigantic, a dose of, well, here's why it's important to share and all that stuff on Sesame Street, right? We're just sharing because it's like a nice thing to do and it makes people feel good. And then, theoretically, we grow up thinking, yeah, sharing's not the worst thing in the world, I guess. Although, that does tend to be beaten out of us quite a bit.
Right.
I do have to say one other really quickly message that I picked up on this. Fear of the unknown is nuts. The sea monkeys have lived in fear and expectation of air breathers coming for them. And they haven't even seen air breathers in generation after generation after generation. But the second Spock and Kirk show up, they're like, oh, it's the air breather spies. We've been expecting you. And they never say, yeah, you guys actually don't have air breathers anymore.
Right.
There are no air breathers on your planet.
They were relying on their ancient texts, and that was an unreliable source of information. And Spock pretty much calls it out about the prejudice thing there. Some people don't like others based on how they look. They find Kirk and Spock grotesque and ugly. And Spock says many people fear beings different from themselves. So I thought that was obviously, Spock calls that out as a message of the interpersonal relationship, but then kind of on the bigger level, the macro level of this whole society fearing what is outside of them.
Sit tight, little ensign. There's more mission log ahead. Right after this.
The most exciting game ever, the Star Trek Phaser Battle, the game that fires back. Just power on. It's an exact replica of the Star Trek telescreen. Watch out, here comes the Klingon. Press the trigger on the phaser launcher. Hear the phaser fire. The Klingon ship galaxy. You can hear the phasers launch. You missed. The Klingon fires back. Is this a Star Trek phaser battle?
Sure is, Dad. Wanna try it?
Okay.
Turn it up to Fleet Commander, Dad. That'll make it tough for you.
Wow, this is fast. There's the alert. Press the force shield. Fire again. Check your score. Your hit is recorded on an LED readout screen. Every time you miss, the Star Trek phaser battle fires back. You've got to raise your shields to stop them, and you've only got 3 chances or you're out. Star Trek Electronic Phaser Battle, the game that fights back. It's just as tough for Dad as it is for you. New from Miko.
And now, back to Mission Log. Cartoon number 2. The Slaver Weapon.
Act 1. Spock, Uhura, and Sulu are in a shuttle on their way to Starbase 25 to drop off a slaver stasis box. What's a slaver? Well, slavers were a highly advanced race that once ruled the galaxy. They kept everyone else enslaved until one race revolted. All intelligent life was destroyed in the battle that ensued, and intelligent life had to evolve all over again, according to Mr. Spock. Now, what's a stasis box? Well, it's a box that keeps things in stasis. Whatever state they're in when they're put in the box, that's the way they stay for years, hundreds of years, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. Think of it like Tupperware, but better. Stasis boxes are all that's left of the slaver technology. Well, that and the stuff found inside the stasis boxes. Sometimes the stuff inside is great, like an anti-gravity belt. Sometimes the stuff inside is not so great, like a grenade with the pin pulled. Think Let's Make a Deal, but more deadly. Suddenly the stasis box in Spock's care is glowing, which is odd. They only do that when near another stasis box. Think fireflies, but better. Spock thinks it's unlikely that a slaver stasis box could have remained undiscovered in this well-traveled part of space. Still, this one is glowing, and they decide to see if they can find its counterpart. That takes them to a little airless, icebound world. Spock's readings indicate that the second stasis box should be right under them. But before they can dig for it, fish cats! No, I'm not cursing. It's the Kzinti, identified by John last week in the Time Trap as fish cats. They're mostly cat, actually. They've got weird submariner-like ears. Phasers drawn, the Kzinti stun Spock, Uhura, and Sulu. Spock's a bit bummed that he was duped by the Kzinti. He knew there was probably no stasis box here, even though the stasis box he had indicated that there was. This may be a bigger problem than it seems, though. The Kzinti aren't supposed to have phasers. A past treaty with the Federation says so. That treaty was necessitated by 4 wars fought between humanity and the Kzin. 4 wars the Kzin lost. These are really bad guys. They eat people. And they appear to have broken their no-weapons treaty. Also, the 3 members of the Enterprise crew are caught in a police web, limiting their movements to a hexagon about 8 feet by 8 feet. If they can't kill its power, they can't do anything. In come the Kzinti, with one old, bedraggled fish cat member. He is their reader of minds. Well, there's no way to guard against their mind probes for sure, but Spock has an idea. First of all, he's only worried about Sulu. The mind reader will ignore Spock and Uhura because they're seen as inferior beings, Spock being a vegetarian and Uhura being a woman. So Sulu, if you think the Kzinti mind reader is trying to read your mind, think of eating a raw vegetable. Seriously. And Uhura, don't say anything or do anything. Kzinti females are dumb animals. If you act dumb, the Kzinti may forget that you're not a dumb animal, then you may be able to get the drop on them. Chuffed, Captain, addresses Sulu. He, Spock, and Uhura are prisoners aboard the privateer Trader's Claw, a stolen police vessel with absolutely no ties whatsoever to the Kzinti government. No, sir, we are out here on our own. If we get caught doing bad things, our government will have no knowledge of the prisoners we're taking, of the treaties we're breaking. Yeah, secretly they're working for the Kzinti government, though giving the government plausible deniability. If they're caught, they were acting on their own. If, on the other hand, they find, say, a slaver weapon inside the stasis box, get ready for human fish cat war number 5. Box open, the Kzinti find what may well be a picture of a slaver, first one of those ever found. Fresh meat, because the stasis box locks in freshness, and a previously undiscovered weapon. What's the Kzinti word for bingo? Act 2. The Kzinti are assessing the finds in the box. The picture is probably of a slaver, the meat is poisonous, and the weapon they will try out on the people from the Enterprise. It's a really stunning device. Toggle a toggle and it completely changes shape into a laser, just like the ones they already have, and a personal jet that the Kzinti chuffed captain cannot control. He knocks into Uhura, who is freed from the police web, and starts running until she's hit with a phaser stun. The Kzinti continue their weapons test. Unbeknownst to them, this setting kills the power to the police web holding Sulu, Spock, and Uhura. The Kzinti haven't noticed, though, and the 3 Enterprise members make for the shuttle. The Kzinti do notice that. Sulu and Spock get away, though Uhura is caught. But Sulu and Spock have leverage. In escaping, Spock kicked the chuffed captain, a huge blow to the chuffed captain's honor, so he'll not be calling for help. Spock also took the slaver weapon, so they have the biggest bargaining chip imaginable. And what's the deal with the slaver weapon anyway? Sulu surmises it must have been a weapon for a spy. If so, says Spock, it would probably have a self-destruct component built in. Just then, the Traitor's Claw calls Sulu with a message. Start bargaining, or things are going to get truly unpleasant for your female. Act 3. Chuffed Captain wants the weapon in exchange for Lieutenant Uhura. Also, he wants to fight Spock to the death. Spock thinks he would probably lose, though, and Sulu says no dice. He and Spock go back to testing the slaver weapon and find a truly horrific setting, one capable of destruction the likes of which the Federation has never seen. So they can't give this to the Kzinti. No. Maybe they should have run instead of talking about it. The force of the weapon blows back on them, knocks them cold. They awake back in the police web in the Kzinti ship. The Kzinti have the weapon, and they're trying to figure out how to blow stuff up the way Sulu and Spock did. They find yet another setting, one that lets the Kzinti talk with the weapon, and it talks back. Spock is amazed. A computer that small with such power? The Federation apparently has nothing like that. The Kzinti start quizzing the device, though it won't give up the information they want without certain code words, which the Kzinti don't know. What was your mission? I cannot tell you without the code words. How long were you inactive? I cannot tell you without the code words. How do we turn you into the most awesome destructive force we've ever seen? Oh, twist my handle. Really? No, not really. They don't know it, but the Kzinti have found the self-destruct. They take it outside and blow themselves up with it. Spock figures the slaver weapon figured it had been caught by the enemy and did what it was programmed to do. Destroy itself and its captors. Sulu's sorry to see the thing destroyed. It would have looked great in a museum, though Spock seems glad it's gone. It was too powerful, and other races would have tried for it. The Vulcan muses on how often the past can encroach on the present, which brings us to the end.
Ken, the most difficult thing to grapple with here at the end of this episode is there's this fish cat everywhere.
It's not good eating, you know. I mean,
no.
The humans are much better enemies. They don't eat their dead.
Right, that we know of.
Well,
yeah,
that's true. I don't know. Yeah. Although fried fish cat. I'm sorry, no, wait, that's fried catfish. My bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
See, there you go.
There you are.
This episode was written by Larry Niven, and it is well known that it was adapted from his short story, The Soft Weapon. And that was actually Gene Roddenberry's suggestion that he adapt that story for this episode. He's best known for the Ringworld series. Ringworld came out in 1970, and his TV credits included Land of the Lost, which I've mentioned before, and The Outer Limits.
He also co-wrote The Mote in God's Eye with Jerry Purnell, didn't he?
Oh, I believe you are right. Yes,
I read that. I've not read the Ringworld books, but I have read The Mote in God's Eye and The Gripping Hand, and I actually found those fascinating.
Cool.
Now, I will say, you can certainly tell the episodes that are written by a novelist.
Yes.
Versus the episodes written by, somebody who's just writing a TV script. Because somebody who's writing a TV script will give you maybe 18 minutes of content for a 24-minute episode. And this one, he's got a universe going. I mean, he's actually told us, and we know a lot, for only having a few boxes with a few technological gadgets in them, we know a lot about the slavers, including the fact that all intelligent life was destroyed, and intelligent life had to re-evolve. They were not like, bombed back to the Stone Age.
Right.
They were bombed back to, in the beginning.
Yeah.
There was nothing, and then eventually there was some stuff. Look in the ordainments if that was too short for you to know what I'm talking about.
Right. I found it very interesting that this is an amazing technology / weapon that is totally under control of Starfleet, and we are stealing technology from it, like gravity fields, as described by Spock. So that's kind of cool.
You mean the stasis boxes?
Well, yeah. We get the stasis box, and then there's stuff in it, and Starfleet's like, well, all right, we can use this. Let's get this over to the 23rd century equivalents of Area 51,
right,
and start reverse engineering that alien technology, and that's how we get cool things.
Now, what's weird is Spock actually says, so the stasis boxes are so advanced and the stuff inside them so advanced that very few people are actually allowed to handle them.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to Starbase 25.
Right.
So is Starbase 25 the only place they can do that and those few people are there? Or do you just go to the nearest stasis box drop-off point?
I was hoping they'd just go to the drop-off point.
The nearest one? Really?
Yeah, because if they're all at Starbase 25, then all the other enemies of Starfleet have to do is show up at Starbase 25.
It is Memory Alpha all over again.
I know. That would just be a mess.
Not be good. Not be good at all.
It was cool to see Spock, Uhura, and Sulu on their own.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of neat. It was something we would have never gotten on the original series.
Well, no. Although, it reminded me of Into Darkness. Sorry. I'm kidding. Here's the thing. You would not have gotten that, but I will say Spock does seem to have learned a lot about command since the Galileo 7 days. Mm-hmm. I do think he needs to cut himself a tiny bit of slack, though.
Yeah.
He says, I should have known there was another stasis box out here because people come here. This place is like Niagara Falls. I mean, nobody comes near here without coming here, right?
Right.
Because apparently there's some really neat thing to see in the sky or something. So people have been all over this place, and yet they never found the stasis box. I should have known. But I mean, logically, there was in fact another stasis box there. I mean, what he should have anticipated, I guess, maybe was that the stasis box might be there as a trap. But he needs to cut himself a little bit of slack because, it's doing the stasis box thing when there's another stasis box around.
Yeah.
And who knows? Put those two together, you might get a bunch of little baby stasis boxes.
Right. Right.
I might be misunderstanding how the stasis box works, actually.
You might. How about that line? Kzinti females are dumb animals.
Yeah.
Spock apologizes for this, and Uhura takes offense at the idea, but then Spock sort of explains the cultural context, if you will. So it was one of the first, maybe one of the first references here where there's some sort of like self-awareness of sexism.
Yes, very much so. Actually, I mean, if you don't mind me skipping back and forth a little bit between the we're just talking about it and we're actually talking about it part. I've actually got in my notes 3 cheers for the anti-sexism message. Spock tells Uhura to play dumb because Kzinti females are dumb, as you say. It bothered me that Uhura was offended, but I get you have to explain to 8-year-olds why she's going to play dumb, because certainly, this is a time where Uhura might reasonably stand up and say, I am woman, hear me roar, right? But Spock's like, hey, look, I know you're smart. You don't have to tell me, all right? I actually value, everything you have to offer. But they don't. And so playing dumb would actually be the smartest thing you can do. Because if they're not even going to give you a second thought, then you can give as much thought as you want to the best way to get out of here, and you can help get the drop on them, right? This to me is anti-sexism and anti a lot of other isms too. You're basically saying that operating on preconceived notions about people just because of, gender, race, creed, religion, you name it, could be a huge mistake. And thankfully it's a mistake in this episode that the Enterprise is not making. Or that the people that we know and like aren't making, but the Kzinti certainly are in a big way, right. Including people who don't eat meat. I won't even talk to you. You eat vegetables.
I'm sorry, Ken. I tuned out of what you were saying. I was imagining eating a raw vegetable while you were doing that. So.
With your flat teeth.
Right. The other thing yes, 3 cheers for that moment of anti-sexism messaging going on. And I thought that we were back to some of the other discussions we had in the original series. Here's a technology that is so powerful that people are fighting for it. Mm-hmm. And it contains, the box contains potentially weapons and technology so powerful that we have to fight each other to keep each other from getting it or keep it from falling into the wrong hands. However, this is the 23rd century. This is Star Trek, so we already have some pretty powerful technology ourselves. And we basically want the people who we fight to be at the same level of development. So we will fight other people in spaceships, but we don't want those other people who are also in spaceships that can also warp away, that also have phasers and that kind of weapon, to get the next best weapon. We want to make sure that stays there. So at least we want to kind of even the playing field. So there is something strange there about kind of the assumption that we will fight, the assumption that these weapons will be used. I mean, the Kzinti, they're a little dangerous. We've established that.
Yeah, but then Spock says that somebody else would have come after it too. I can't remember who he named. I know he named the Klingons. I can't remember which other races he named. But he was because Sulu does his best like Indiana Jones and says, that belongs in a museum. And,
I know, right.
And Spock's like, no, that wouldn't have made it to a museum because everybody would have been after it.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't advertise.
Yeah, exactly. You don't advertise. These weapons are so bad that only we should have them.
No, that nobody should. I got the sense. Yeah. See, that's interesting that you're saying that. I got the sense in the end that Spock was glad that it was gone because it was a Pandora's box times, 8. Right. Or 9 even. I mean, it was so dangerous that it shouldn't be out there anyway. Yeah. Of course, they didn't know what was in the box. I mean, they weren't going to open the box. They were going to drop it off at Starbase 25 and let them deal with it. Mm-hmm. Which is sort of an interesting thing for Spock to do, but that goes back to his whole org chart thing. I mean, if he's going to come to a point of thinking maybe there's something so dangerous in here that nobody should have it, then would Spock just say, so I'm going to dispose of it? Or would Spock just look at the box and go, man, I am so glad I don't know what's in there?
Yeah, right.
I don't even have to think about it. I'm just going to drop this off and then go back to Niagara Falls or whatever that place was called.
Well, I guess the thing that I was grappling with is that it's still a weapon. Whether it's more powerful than the weapon that Spock has right now, a phaser, it's still a weapon. And Starfleet has all kinds of weapons. So, if you wanted to extrapolate this to modern arguments about gun control and that kind of thing, they say in this episode the weapon is haunted by its previous owners. We assign these values to weapons because of their intended uses when actually any weapon in the wrong hands has the ability to kill. Mm-hmm. The slaver weapon is a bad thing, and it just tore out a chunk of that planet and took a whole lot of fish cats with it. But Spock, Sulu, and Uhura could have done just as much damage with a phaser on overload. They could have also gone in there and killed a bunch of fish cats with their phasers. They didn't because they are moral people abiding by a certain code.
Well, hold on a minute, though, because it feels to me like you're like sort of conflating 2 or 3 things. I mean, first of all,
I very much am.
The fact that this thing took out a chunk of the planet. I mean, to say it that way for people who haven't watched the cartoon, and I know there are some people who are not watching the cartoon but still listening to the podcast, which is kind of interesting to me.
For shame.
Well, they just hate the cartoon that much,
right.
But they like us, so more power to them. I wouldn't say for shame. I would say well done, sir or madam, as the case may be. Please let us continue. I mean, all that blew up the fish cats was the Kzinti was the self-destruct mechanism that was meant to protect the weapon. I mean, the true weapon was the thing, and I didn't really illustrate it very well in the description, but Sulu shoots off to the horizon and produces a mushroom cloud.
Right.
And the blowback from the weapon that I said hit them is basically the same thing that you see in all of those films of mushroom clouds from atomic weapons in the 1950s and 60s. Where all of a sudden, this shock wave comes and blows Sulu and Spock over to the point that it knocks them out. Here's the thing, though: we didn't know any of that at the beginning of the episode. Had they not been trapped by the Kzinti, and had the Kzinti not opened the box, all they were doing was running UPS, or all they were doing was running FedEx. I mean, they were going from point A to point B with it. So, I mean, you're raising a sort of a bigger question about the Federation, I think. Like, why do they get whatever's in this box as opposed to somebody else? Should there not be some, gigantic organization that, shares all of this information? But there is, and it's called the Federation. I mean, the Kzinti are still hell-bent, despite the treaty. And this also plays a little bit weird with the timeline, because the last war was 200 years ago, which I think is about the time we were first going to space in Star Trek, or first, getting the warp drive. And yet that was the fourth war between humans and Kzinti.
Yeah.
Maybe Spock's right. Maybe cats really are just the worst thing ever. Maybe we're fighting that battle. We might be fighting the third battle right now.
It's terrible.
All that aside, forgive me, I don't think Spock was sailing in saying, okay, well, we have this weapon and we're the only ones that are allowed to have this weapon and nobody else can, so we have to protect it. I mean, again, Spock had no idea what was in the box. It's weird to me that Spock didn't want to know what was in the box because it was so dangerous, but he's, while he is second in command on the Enterprise, he's low man on the totem pole as far as the Federation is concerned. So, I mean, it's really not up to him to find out.
Well, it goes back to that. You made one Indiana Jones reference, and now it just goes back to the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's going to be in a box, in a warehouse, with a lot of other boxes.
There you go.
Nobody can get to it.
Let's hope nothing happens to that. There was one other message really quickly, and again, it's sort of anti-Kzinti thing. Honor before all else is dopey.
Yeah.
The Kzinti chuffed captain was beaten by an herbivorous.
Yes.
I'm saying it wrong. Plant-eating pacifist. And then the worst part of the whole thing was he was left alive.
Yeah.
Pride keeps the chuffed captain from calling for help. Had he gone ahead and called for help, we'd all be speaking Kzinti.
Right.
If he had just gone ahead and buried his pride and said, I hate that this happened. I don't want to talk about it, but I need you to come here and help me kill these 3 people, because that's it. It's 3 people standing between us and total galactic domination. But then I would have to explain that guy hit me. So never mind. Pride cometh before the fall. Actually, honor before all else is dopey. And the Kzinti learned that the hard way this week.
I agree. I would also say that there's something kind of interesting here about past actions having consequence in the future. At least the slavers had thought through some logic on this with their weapon. That it was intelligent enough to know when it was in the wrong hands. But yes, we can keep building weapons, but we cannot guarantee that we will always have control over them.
Yeah.
So apply that to the arms race, or however you'd like to apply it. But I think that is just as pertinent a message now as it was then, and will continue to be.
So tell me this, boys and girls, what would you like to apply that message to? There are lots of ways to let us know. Facebook, Skype, and Twitter. The handle is MissionLogPod. You can call us 323-522-5641. That number again, 323-522-5641. You can email us, missionlog@roddenberry.com. And remember, we may use your comments on an upcoming episode of Mission Log.
Next weekend, we wrap up Season 1 of the animated series with Eye of the Beholder and The Jihad.
Music for Mission Log provided by Big Organ Trio. Find their self-titled album on iTunes. Additional music provided by Warp 11, online at warp11.com, and from the album Messages by Key Theory, free to download at kitheory.com. Look for John and Ken Mission Log yo-yos in specially marked boxes of Star Trek, the Ambergris cereal. It's ambergrisy. And transmission.